456.
On the afternoon of the 20th of October, 29th of October, we at police headquarters in Jerusalem were asked to take in an armoured car tea to a party in ambush at the Jerusalem railway station. We had been informed it was likely to be made by either the Ergen or Stern at the railway station in the German colony of Jerusalem. Approximately 2:30, maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we were proceeding in the direction of the Yemen Moshi quarter when a young Arab boy drew our attention to a taxi parked outside the entrance of the Montefiore quarter and told us there was a bomb in it. We drove the armoured car over the culvert of the road, a small bridge, and then outside of the actual Montefiore quarter. When we got out, we found the taxi had the engine ticking over and no one was in it. But a blood trail started to commence to go into the entrance of the Montefiore quarter and went up the steps right the way up towards the middle of the top of the quarter. Our attention to a house was drawn to us by members of an observation tower in the back of the King David Hotel. The house that they indicated, we opened the door, and in there we found a man who we later knew to be פיינשטיין, standing there with a tourniquet on his arm, being applied with a scrubbing brush by a young auburn-haired girl. We, at that stage, heard a tremendous explosion, and we saw the pigeons fluttering up into the sky above the area of German colony. At that particular moment, we were joined by one of the party who had been in ambush at the railway station, who informed us at that stage the railway station had just been blown up. Whereupon we took פיינשטיין from the room he was in and down towards some steps. As we came down the steps, we were met by a group of Argyll Sutherland Highlanders under the command of a second lieutenant, and I told the second lieutenant to take פיינשטיין and to take him to Government Hospital in Jerusalem. At that stage, the army officer went to attack פיינשטיין, and פיינשטיין said, "I demand to be treated as a prisoner of war." Also, a photographer of the Chicago Tribune attempted to take photographs, which we prevented. On פיינשטיינ's departure with an army unit, we then proceeded in another direction along a road where on the right hand side we came to a building which was a small synagogue with a door, and opposite to the door an old lady stood crying. We did not take notice of that at the particular time, but on cracking the door open, we discovered on the floor 2 grenades and I believe I remember rightly some gelignite in a very small package. These we picked up and took out of the building, or almost a passage, and then because of the woman crying outside this house, we opened the door of the house, and in it we found a man lying on a bed, and he had 14 bullet holes in his abdomen and legs. These appeared to have congealed, and because of his swarthy complexion, it was believed that he would possibly be Yemenite. A woman was standing there attempting to give some form of first aid, and I recall taking a sheet and tearing it into shreds, which I commenced to put around the actual parts of the body where the blood was still running. At this stage we were joined by a Deputy Superintendent of Police, Jack Bourne, who requested or told me to take פיינשטיין in a Jewish Star of David ambulance, which had arrived outside of the Montefiore quarter, direct to the government hospital, with an escort of armoured cars, and then, of course, to assure that the driver proceeded there and did not deviate at all. At approximately, I would think, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe, I'm not sure, but about 4 o'clock, we therefore went and arrived at the government hospital to find that פיינשטיין was already confined to a hospital ward. Azulai was immediately seen by doctors, and we left at that stage to give our statements to our police headquarters. The following day I inspected the ward of the prison hospital ward and found that פיינשטיין was there, and his arm had been amputated, I believe, if I remember rightly, on the left hand side. On the right hand side, Azulai lay in a bed with a form of cover over his legs to prevent any weight being on them, and various bullets fired at them from ambush sections had been extracted from his body, and he then was out of danger. In Hebrew he said to פיינשטיין to thank myself and my sergeant for attending his wounds. פיינשטיין said this in perfect English to us. Some while later, incidentally of course, we lost in the actual explosion a sergeant of the Palestine police who had been a bomb expert. His name was Smith, George Smith. A little later on, the actual trial took place of פיינשטיין and Azulai, at which I obviously gave evidence, together with Sergeant Cox. After parts of the trial, we would have conversation with פיינשטיין, and I remember him saying to me, I have nothing against the British, I have only against the British government. He then said, he knew I smoked senior service cigarettes, and I remember him saying to me, if I could bet you a packet of cigarettes, I would bet that I will never hang. And little did we know that his meaning was not that he would escape, but obviously that he would commit a form of suicide to prevent him being hung. I recall also noting from time to time outside the court during that particular period a red-headed girl who I believe now to have been either a fiancée or girlfriend of פיינשטיין, who used to often stand against the wall peering into the actual courtroom area. As an aftermath of this, the Azulai and פיינשטיין were both sentenced to death, but after some period of time, Azulai's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, and after several appeals, פיינשטיין was sentenced to definitely die on a particular day, to be hung on a day, in companionship with another member of the Irgun who had been arrested whilst about to throw a grenade at the Brigadier in the Royal Air Force area of York's Road, Jerusalem. Therefore, this man also at a further trial had been sentenced to death, and both פיינשטיין and Vazani were in the same cell at the time when they were due to hang. I believe I'm right in suggesting that on the night before they were to hang, a rabbi attended them, and פיינשטיין asked that he should not return in the morning. My sergeant and myself were actually present during the night for last identification, and in the early hours in the morning there was a tremendous explosion, and when we reached the stairs we realized that both פיינשטיין and Vazani had in some way or other blown themselves up. We later understood that this was with oranges which had been either smuggled into them and which contained gelignite, and the heat of their body pressed together created the explosion. I believe it was intended that they hoped that in the morning when we were to go down for our last identification that they would be able to die taking members of the British administration with them. But the very fact that the rabbi was present, would be present, created the situation whereby they decided they would not go through with their original plan. In circumstances like these, obviously the Palestine police were doing their work, and we feel, even at this stage, that such a great loss of very young lives, 18, 19, 20, 21, boys who'd come from Britain in those days, together with chaps who'd come from the various airborne forces and joined the Palestine police, that was a terrible waste of life. And of course we also feel that it was a terrible waste of life of such young men like פיינשטיין, who obviously to me was an intelligent, good-looking type of person who I would have been pleased to have met in any other circumstance.
Thank you. And
these years not so long ago were 1945, when I left the army and joined the Palestine police. I was stationed first in Jenin, where we were originally trained. One will appreciate that at that stage, at the very end of the war, we had been informed that our problems would be with the Arabs. Frankly, I had little knowledge of Judaism, nor did I have very much knowledge of Jewish people, except those who lived in the area of Golders Green, whom we knew and who we played football or table tennis against, the Maccabean people like this. And so therefore it was a shock to young 19-year-olds to find the enmity from those people whom we felt at that stage we had initially gone to war to try and help, and that we had known that at various stages British forces had entered and freed those people in the concentration camps in Europe. So it was a shock to our system. One of the things that we did in the early stages, then after I was in Jerusalem, I went to Shaframa. In Shaframa we were blown up in the what we call the police mobile force camp there by Haganah, who, to prevent us going out to bring in the refugees from various ships that were coming in at that stage illegally into the country. To prevent us going out on the vessels to bring them in, the Haganah decided that they would blow up the police mobile forts of Kathavikin, Sarona, and also in Shafram. In 1946, the police mobile forces were disbanded, and the men from the force were transferred to the various parts of the force, I going to Jerusalem, where initially I served in German colony in Jerusalem, which to me was like a small village, and the people were mostly, I think, German. Most of them seemed to work for the government or worked in some professional capacity. So again, it was a shock when we first started to go out in what we called army or recce cars, and to apprehend the members of the Haganah and Ergen who used to put up leaflets and pamphlets at various areas, in the various areas of the city, with the background of the Ergen or Herzl or Stern gang. We considered this more or less a game. We used to go out in rubber boots or rubber shoes and chase these fellows and catch them, quite often cuff them by the ear and let them go. So it was a game to us, and it wasn't obviously until the various buildings were blown up by the Herzl and by the Stern that we then we became bitter, and obviously the Jews who were members of these groups became our sworn enemies. Certainly the names of people like Begin and the Friedman Yellin became for us just as much an enemy as Hitler had been to us in the war. From that point of view, therefore, as a young sergeant, which I had then become, my whole feeling was very anti-Judaism because of that situation. We obviously became more sided towards the Arab situation because of it. But at the same time, we had a tremendous respect for those members of our force who were either Jewish or Arab, and we had this fantastic combination of British, Jew and Arab working together in this police force. And that also was, of course, for the ordinary people who we met in the streets of Jerusalem. We still continued to talk to them where we could, because again, we could no longer go to cafes and sit with the people at all. We couldn't ask them to dance. We couldn't do anything of this nature. And as young 20, 21-year-olds, it was a very difficult period for us. I later on became one of the chief security people for the United Nations team who arrived in Jerusalem for their fact-finding commission, and I was associated with them for the time that they were there, and I became later on a escort and bodyguard to Dr. Ralph Bunch, the United Nations mediator. This was as an aftermath, if you recall, when we left Palestine. Again, a member of the mediator, Count Bernadotte, was again killed by Stern members, and this again left the type of difficult situation not only for us but for many other people in the world. So that's why in this day and age, when I return to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, that my mind goes back to those days. It goes back also to our love of that country, which we feel sure our Israeli people lived and were born there and went there in their early days have, and the same love, I'm sure, that the Palestinian Arab has for it. And for us, what we would love to see is the peace for everyone.